As a Native American, my family would tell me stories of Bigfoot. I personally have never had an encounter myself with the creature, but around May, I believe it was Cinco de Mayo, and a lot of my friends had come over to eat Mexican food and drink a little, and I had about 3 beers that night, and my friends suggested we go and drink at a bridge about 20 miles out in the middle of nowhere. There's a lot of trees and fields around this area, and we had made a few stops here and there to chill and laugh. And we stopped at this old stone bridge. It had spray paint on it, and we pulled up 2 cars full, and so we chilled in the cars for about 10 minutes parked beside each other. Figured we'd step out on the bridge. It wasn't even 2 minutes that we were on the bridge, and we all heard a really loud roar from the right side. I swear it was only about 15 or so feet away from the bridge, and we all jumped and drove so fast. I had never went back after that, and I guess a lot of my family has also told me stories about that area. It was the first Tuesday of the Pennsylvania deer rifle season, December 3rd, 2013. Now, I've always been an avid hunter, and I would wake up very early in the morning to get into the woods before daylight. I would be in the woods at 4:30 in the morning. Having to hunt on state game lands meant beating other people into the woods to get a decent spot. When I got to the parking area around 4:15, no one else was there. So I walked into the woods, not even using a flashlight, only walking by moonlight. I walked through a field into the little tree line and started on the path to my spot. I came to the intersection in the path. One way went left, down the mountain, other way went right. I went right, because my spot was on the other side. Roughly 50 yards after making the right-hand turn, I smelled what I can only describe as hot garbage. It just hit me right in the face. Like, I mean hot dumpster juice garbage in the middle of August. So, I stopped dead, turned on my flashlight expecting to see piles of garbage. Nothing. No garbage, nothing dead, no corpses, no animals, nothing. Just hot garbage smell. Now keep in mind, this is in December. It's freezing outside. High 20s, maybe all the way up to low 30s. So even if there was garbage, it shouldn't smell that bad. So I kind of thought nothing of it at the time, and I just followed the path to my spot, which was down over the ridge from the garbage smell. Roughly, maybe 40 feet down, that leads into a grass field where I would sit. I sit at my seat, got settled in for about 2 or so minutes. That's when the rocks started coming down the ridge. First rock startled me, causing me to turn on my light again, scanning the field hoping to see eye reflection of a deer, but nothing else was there. I sat back down. Another rock comes down the ridge. This time I stand up and I go out into the grass field with a flashlight and the pistol. My rifle was a .444 Marlin, and I happened to carry it while I was hunting. I scanned again, nothing, and purposely waited in the field for about 5 minutes. Now I'm getting angry, assuming another hunter is just messing with me because I'm in their spot. I sit down again. The third rock, sounding larger than the others, comes tumbling down the ridge. I don't get up this time, and not 2 minutes after that, another rock. Not tumbled, but sounded as though it was thrown off the ridge and landed in the field. Now shit, I'm pissed. I gathered up my gear and started back up the trail to the ridge. I get on top of the ridge, scanning with my light the whole time. Nothing, no eye shine, nothing. No other hunter that I could see. I get to the spot where I smelt the hot garbage. Still nothing. And the smell is gone though. And it finally clicked in my head. It may not have even been another person, but possibly something else. I've heard other stories of people's Bigfoot experiences, a lot of which remark about how bad they smell. I all but ran out of the woods, and to top it all off, no other vehicles were in the parking area when I got out of the woods either. And this took place in Pennsylvania State Game Lands 229, outside of Tremont. I later come to find out that a coworker of mine had actually seen a bipedal cross in front of his car within 2 miles of location of my experience. So maybe they are real. I don't know. But I definitely had an experience that I will never forget. My name is Matt. I'm a 21-year-old guy from Germany, and I am, or better was, doing work holiday in Canada. This was always a dream for me, to explore and experience this large and beautiful country. It was really a pleasure for me. I arrived here in August and had the best time of my life until this Wednesday, but now it is turning into an absolute nightmare. I always loved driving late at night, especially on relatively remote roads, and that's why I chose to take ON 502 northbound from Fort Francis to Dryden that evening. It was around 11:40 p.m. in a long, bended part of the road, and suddenly a semi with its hazards flashing stood on the right, nearly in the ditch. I stopped in front of the truck and got out to ask the driver if I could help him. I immediately noticed that the left part of its front was really hard damaged. The headlight and grille were broken, and the hood was pushed backwards and smashed a bit of the windscreen. And everything was full of blood. Only then I realized that there was more blood on the road as well, from what I could see in the dark with the small amount of light that came from my taillights, his intact right headlight and his marker lights. Oh God, he hit a bear, was my first thought from the amount of damage I could see, and blood. I walked up to the driver's side door and knocked a few times. He didn't answer. First I thought that perhaps he was going to go get some help, but then I reflected that we were like in the middle of nowhere, and Dryden is like, 50 kilometers away, and that he would more likely use his cell or the CB calling for help. I knocked again and got no response. Then I opened the door. He was huddled in the back cabin. He was shaking. His skin was pale like a dead person's, and he looked with me at so much fear and shock, like he had just seen the devil in person. "Can I help you? You had a really hard accident here. Are you injured?" I asked him, but I got no response. "Hello, are you all right, sir?" "I'm not sure," he stumbled. "Does something hurt?" "No, but I hit it." "I see that. I don't think that bear is still alive anymore, to be honest." It wasn't a bear," he responded with so much fear in his voice. I got confused. Are the elk in this part of Ontario? I'm not a native, so that was the first of what I thought. "It's okay. You're in shock. Take a breath," I responded. "Did you call 911? He didn't even react to my answer. I left him alone in his rig and got to my van to go to my phone. I was glad that I had even got service in this part of the province. I told the operator what had happened, and she assured me to send an officer and an ambulance to the scene. She asked me for which operator the truck was driving. Couldn't give her an answer, but she said that there will be roadside assistance coming as well. I hung up and went to the semi-driver to tell him that I called for help. The only thing he responded to was just a nod. I got my flashlight out of the car and searched for the dead animal. I was still convinced that he had just hit a bear, because I was so very curious what he really hit, to tell them that he did indeed hit a bear. The blood was spread all over the road, and I could see where the bear was flung to. And then I saw its body. Holy shit, that's a huge bear, I thought to myself. The creature was like 9 feet tall. It had really long limbs, and its face, even the head was partially decapitated. It wasn't like that from anything what I had seen until now. It was like I would look into the gorilla-type human face. It was so unreal. The teeth looked like you would see on a great white shark. Its eyes were partially closed, but it was like you could see the pupils glow underneath. They weren't really glowing, but it is the best I can do to describe it. It was so ape-human hybrid-like. Do you people know when you feel really uncomfortable from one moment to the other? That was what I felt then. And I didn't believe in Bigfoot before, but I watched a documentary about it a few years ago. I think it was a part of a show called Monster Quest. I couldn't believe what I saw, but I knew exactly what I was looking at. I never thought that I would experience something like this in my entire life. This can't be real. Where is the hidden camera? Fuck you all, I said so loud to hope there would be a TV crew coming out of the woods at any moment and admit their hoax. But there was no TV crew there. I was alone with the truck driver and this thing. I went back to my car after I vomited into the road and sat into the driver's seat. I think it must have been 30 or maybe 40 minutes. Everything was like in a trance. And then in the distance, I saw the head and emergency lights flickering. It was a police officer or a OPP patrolman, and I can't recall it anymore. He asked for what had happened, and I told him the story I just told you. He was first very suspicious about my story, but I knew that he knew I was talking the truth. He went back to his patrol car and radioed something. Then he went to the trucker. In the distance, I saw another pair of headlights, and the whole crew from the fire department and another police car showed up. The police officer was directing the men of the FD to the rig like he wanted that they only take care of the broken semi and its driver. He then talked to the other police officer, and I could see that he went pale right in the second as the first officer ended his sentence. I was absolutely sure about the fact that both knew that this creature exists, and that they have like a schedule on what to do and what not to do in cases like this, because no one of them went to place where I told the first officer where the body of the creature is. The second officer came up to me and told me that I had to follow him to the police department for a full report, so I drove behind him to Dryden. At the time we drove to the city, maybe after 40 kilometers, a convoy of dark vehicles passed us at high speed to the scene we were coming from. The junction of ON502 and ON594 was blocked, and no car was allowed to drive on the ON502 southbound. Arriving at the police station, the officer took me into the interrogation room and offered me something to drink. I had to wait till someone arrived to interview me, and I had to give away my phone and my personal belongings. First, I refused, but I didn't quite understand why until his voice changed very differently, and so I decided to hand over all my things. After what felt like an eternity, a man in a suit came into the room. He looked really odd, a bit like a ill person because of his grayish skin, bald head, and his shrunken cheeks. I had to recall all the details of what I had experienced to give all of my personal information, my purpose of my journey in Canada, and he took my fingerprints of me, and even a sample of my saliva. I felt like a criminal, so ashamed and uncomfortable, like I did something horrible. And then I had to sign a document like a non-disclosure agreement, but there weren't any coat of arms, banners, or stamps on it. After that, he looked dead in my eyes and asked if I had seen what I had seen. I said yes, and his tone got really straight. He asked me again, and I knew that I had to decline his question. After that, he explained to me that they will follow my steps from now on and that they will know everything I do. It is crazy that they don't make it a secret. Then he went out of the room and was gone. A female officer came to me and gave me back my personal things and explained to me that when they checked my immigration's info, the system told them that I have to leave Canada by January 5th, 2019, and that there was a note, or better yet a command, that I could only take as a direct flight to Germany. My currently ETA got declined and I couldn't apply for any future ETA and even an ESTA as well. I can't believe it, only because I have seen this thing. I can't travel to North America for the rest of my life. I am on a blacklist for now, like a terrorist. When I turned on my phone, it sent me to the first instruction screen, like out of the box. The same with the laptop. So these people erased everything of my electronic devices to be sure that there weren't any information getting to the public. All my pictures are gone. They even put all the things in the van upside down, like they were searching for evidence. I am really sure I am being taped right now, and I'm lucky that I could write my story about this till now to be true. I'm currently here at this disgusting A&W here in Marathon, and will drive back to Toronto now. I really don't know what to do from now on. I have to sell this van, try to quit my insurance here, and get on a flight back home in only 6 days, and even New Year's Eve is between them. Wish me all your luck. The truth must be out there. I was camping in our backyard with my brothers in the early 80s. We were in a tent on our lawn adjacent to our house. An exterior light was turned on from the inside the home, which lit up our tents. I was on the far side of the tent, and when the light turned on, the creature lay down along the tent to hide from the light coming from the home, and doing so, pinning my arm and leg under it. I had to literally pull myself out from under it and move on top of my brother. Once the light was turned off, it got up off the tent. It attacked our kittens that night as well as got into our bunny rabbit cages and killed all of the rabbits. The cages were unlatched anyway, and then later latched back up. We found blood in all of the cages and the remains of one rabbit that looked as if it had just been torn in half. Just down the street, our neighbors witnessed the Bigfoot as it ate fish from his family-owned trout farm. The Utah Fish and Game have plaster casts of the footprint, as well as the local university doing many studies into all of the happenings. That's the quick Cliff Note version of what happened. There are dozens of people in my neighborhood that saw the creature during the day as well as the night, and have many stories of their own. Just recently had a Bigfoot encounter, and when I was 10 years old, I had an encounter where Bigfoot and I made contact. This happened 25 years ago, just outside of my small hometown in Texas. It was early morning, between 8 and 8:30 a.m., and I had just left my hometown, driving northwest on a 2-lane country road. I had only traveled a few miles, and I knew I was coming up on some very high cat details. It was early morning, between 8 and 8:30 a.m. I had just left my hometown, driving northwest on a 2-lane country road. I had only traveled a few miles, and knew I was coming up on some very high cattails. They had been there for a few years, on the right side of the road. As I approached and got within about 50 meters, I saw a huge black, hairy, bipedal creature into the cattails. I saw the right side of the creature, and estimate somewhere between 7 to 8 feet tall. I only saw it for a couple of seconds before it entered the cattails, but it could not be mistaken for any other animal, and it was not too big to be a person. Once it got past that spot, I looked in the rearview mirror. I could see the cattails swaying from something really big moving through them. June 12th, 2009. So my dad and I were hiking back in late November of 2005 in a place called the UBC Research Forest, north of Pitt Meadows, BC, Canada, about 30 miles east and a bit north of Vancouver, Canada. It's on the edge of the mountains with several logging roads and trails. Anyway, the day was already getting late when we headed out. The weather was horrible, no wind, but there were showers and hail and slush. About 3 degrees it was out. We were the only ones in the entire area hiking. The parking lot was empty when we both arrived and left. So after about an hour of hiking randomly up logging roads and trails, we were a good several clicks into the area when we take a break by a small stream and a small gully. Anyway, we smelled this horrible scent. Sorta skunky, sorta musky, with a human and fish scent mixed in. Anyway, neither of us have ever smelled anything like this before, and we both have encountered every large animal there is out there on the coast. Because there was no wind, we knew it was close. So we kept going along this hillside. Above us, 50 feet, is an old overgrown logging slash. Below us, a thickly wooded slope. Could see maybe 100 feet down the slope, if at best. We get this feeling we are being followed. The forest becomes too silent. Even the local ravens didn't even make a sound. We smelled this scent another 2 times. Stronger now. So we began hiking faster, and as we come out of the small gully, we hear a crash. Spinning around, we race back to the crest and look back down. Something large and tall, easily taller than my dad, who is 6 foot, disappears into the bush. We just catch a glimpse of a dark brown, because neither of us is alarmed, and we continue on at full pace, knowing there is a logging road ahead. Again, we smell this weird smell, and we heard noises from the old logging meadows above us. Whatever it is moving very silently, yet the odd time it would break a branch or bump a small tree. Anyway, I've been followed by a bear and cat before, and neither moved like this. It was just way too silent to be either. And just for the record, grizzlies aren't in this area, but I have encountered them before too. After we round a bend in the slope, we hear movement again. It was on the lower side of us now, or seemed to. After another few minutes, we hear it again and smell it now. Now it was moving on the upper side of us, just over a low ridge, maybe not even 100 feet away. But by now we can see the logging road 100 or 200 feet ahead. Then this thing let out a cry. It sent a shiver down my spine. My dad, who I have never seen afraid before, except the one time I was near death, went cold. It sounded the cross between a whoop, a human, and something unknown. It lasted for about 5 seconds. We turned and ran down the road. Running down the road, we passed a junction and continue heading south. I dropped something a few seconds later, about 200 feet past the junction. I stop, turn, and pick it up. Up amongst the trees, something tall and dark ducked out of sight. What it was, I haven't a clue, but it was tall and fairly slim. It was too dark to really tell what it was, and so we ran back to the parking lot. Unfortunately, it snowed the next day. Otherwise, we would have gone back and searched for evidence of this occurrence, which to this day baffles the both of us. Nevertheless, this is the only time I have ever been scared in the woods. So I'm going to try to give as many details as possible. I live in Ohio, around Youngstown, and my family owns a cabin in Pennsylvania. It's my grandfather's cabin, and he's a retired firefighter. Years ago, he and his firefighter friends would go hunting in the forest. His friends stayed in a tree stand while the rest were spread out amongst the property in various stands. Around lunchtime, they planned to meet up and eat. Calling a friend, he wouldn't answer for anyone over any sort of walkie-talkie or anything. They decided to meet up and go check on him, and they found him petrified, hiding duck down in the stand. They said small trees looked like they had been snapped with ease, and he was white as a ghost. He claimed there was a large, estimated 8-foot tall humanoid creature that stunk so bad and had been tearing down trees left and right had walked underneath the stand. So tall its head almost touched it. He had no idea what it was, and in all of his years of hunting had never seen anything like that. He didn't even know what to do or think. My grandfather is a very skeptical person and wouldn't make up this story for no reason. It really just makes you think. I used to drive a truck across the continental 48 states, from Maine to Los Angeles, then from Miami all the way to Seattle. I have driven the entire length and breadth of the United States. I drove exclusively overnight. It's my natural schedule anyway, and my driving partners always appreciated it. On this occasion, I was driving truck throughout the Appalachian Mountains, quite late at night to be precise, somewhere around 3 a.m. I am drinking a Mountain Dew, listening to an audiobook, and focusing on the road in front of me. And suddenly, something dashes across the road in front of me in my headlights. I only see it for a few moments, but there's something completely wrong with it. It's bipedal for one, and its head is in line with my windshield, which means it must be 10 feet tall minimum. It's really hairy, and while it's human-shaped, there's something off about it that I can't explain. For those brief moments I see it, it looks misshapen, hunched over, all the lines are wrong. And then in a flash, it's across the road and gone, and I can never prove it was ever there. August 5th, 2017, Mammoth, California. My ex-fiancé and I were avid climbers, hikers, and explorers of the East Side Sierra Nevada mountain range, and we decided to go up to the Yosemite to climb. Now, Yosemite is stupid crazy to get campsite reservations for, so we decided to stay on the BLM land a few miles down the 395 from Mammoth, where we didn't have to pay for camping. We pitched our tent and got settled in, made dinner. Then I went to go set up our trash bag about 1,000 feet from camp. I don't like having bears close to my tent, so that's why I have trash a ways away. It had started to rain a little bit, so we went into the tent and went to sleep around 8:30. It was probably roughly maybe 11:30 on the 5th it had stopped raining, and I had to take a leak. So I put my flip-flops and headlamp and start walking to the spot where I figured it's far enough away that it wouldn't attract anything. Now it had just stopped raining, so when it was dead quiet, so I dismissed the silence as everything was hunkered down. So from where I was taking a leak, the trash bag was only about 200 yards to my right. As I finish up, I looked to make sure the bag wasn't blown down during the relatively heavy storm that just finished up, and it wasn't in the tree, so I looked at the ground and saw the biggest black bear I'd ever seen. So I started hollering and screaming and making a lot of noise to scare it off. Then it fucking stood up and looked at me, just covered in hair, at about 8 feet tall with shoulders as wide as a meter stick, and then ran off. I said, fuck this, I'm going back to the tent, and sprinted the entire way. I get back in the tent and my fiance asked me why I was yelling, and I told her I was scaring off a bear from the trash bag. She snuggles back in and falls asleep. Now I'm wide awake at this point, listening intently for any movement when I start hearing footsteps around the car. And then the footsteps started coming towards the tent, and got scared thinking that this thing, whatever it was, can just come through the tent if it wanted to. It started touching the tent and I could hear heavy breathing and grunting. And then my fiance wakes up, freaks out thinking it was a bear, and grabs the keys and hits the panic button on the car, and whatever it was ran off. I didn't encounter anything again that trip, and I played it off to her as it was just a bear, and we should probably find somewhere new to camp the next night. On August 5th, we packed up and left early to go climb in Yosemite, and when we came back that night in the new campsite, I approached another camper that I recognized from the previous, and he asked me if I had noticed anything weird going on the previous night. I told him the story, and he said that he heard my screaming and car alarm in both times, shortly after something went at full loop through his campsite. While going into his vehicle the next morning, he noticed that there were huge handprints on his car windows, and was freaked out enough to move to a new spot as well. He pitched a tent 30 feet from where we were at, and we together for the remainder of our trip. I'm not sure what I saw, but the closest thing I could relate it to was definitely a Bigfoot. My encounter happened back in September of 2002 in southern Illinois. A friend and I, both 16, just returned from seeing the movie Signs in the theater. My friend's house was a good 10-minute drive outside of my encounter, southern Illinois, 2002 of our town, which is already rural. Later that night, around midnight, we decided to take a walk down an old farm road next to his house that cut through the woods for only about a half mile to an open field in the woods, roughly the size and shape of a football field. So, we grabbed 2 flashlights and started out into the woods. The whole way out, we were trying to freak each other out since we had just got done watching a scary movie. We made our way out to the clearing and were in the corner of the field closest to his house, and we heard footsteps from the opposite side of the field. Pretty far off, our crappy condiment flashlights wouldn't even reach, so we both turned off our lights to try to let our eyes adjust to the dark, and squatted down. When we turned off the lights, the footsteps sound stopped. At this point, we were looking towards the opposite side of the field. A few minutes had passed, and we were talking quietly, trying to figure out who the hell would be in the middle of the woods at midnight. The closest neighbor lived about 3 miles down the road. And suddenly, to our right, we hear something massive running at us. This thing had to be huge. The sound of its feet hitting the ground is nothing I have heard to this day. They just had so much weight behind them. The steps sounded bipedal, 1 foot after the other. Our adrenaline kicked in and I moved faster than I have in my entire life. I had literally felt like I was flying. We ran back to his house in a dead sprint and locked the doors. We briefly discussed what had happened and went to bed. Strangely, we never spoke again about it, and I completely forgot about that night until about 9 years later. I recently got out of the Navy and moved back home. I ran into my friend from that night and he actually brought it up. He had apparently put a good amount of thought into that night over the years. I wasn't very interested in the topic at the time, so I just kind of shook it off and moved forward in life. Years later, I can't quite figure out what happened that night. There have only been a few BFR reports in my area during that same time period. My encounter took place outside of Costa Rica. I didn't see anything, but we heard what was still pretty freaky. I and my brothers went to bed around 10 p.m. After maybe 15 minutes, we started hearing light tree knocking down the road. After a while, we started hearing a very low growl-like thing, almost like a mountain lion. It eased off after a while and came back. and later on we heard something land on the roof. Now, the roofs around here are made of zinc. Things going on the roof aren't exactly rare. In fact, it happens every night. But the strangest thing we heard that night was a tree being pulled out. A few things I'd like to mention is that there are a lot of chickens down here and cattle, going towards a river. A man said that a ghost was looking through his window, and his house is on stilts. If I was looking through the front window, it would be normal. But if it was looking through the bedroom window, the face would have to be about 7 feet and 5 inches off the ground. And that, we think, might have heard an ocelot a few nights ago before that. My dad grew up in North Bend, Washington, on a couple hundred acres on the backside of Rattlesnake Ridge, which is I-90 corridor through North Bend, and had a couple of encounters. Him and my uncle, who's now deceased, would play in one of the lower pastures. One of their favorite games was to climb up these younger alder trees near to the top and then swing down. The trees would bend because they were so young and green. Anyway, they would do that. Sometimes they would climb up and be able to ride bendy branches all the way down, and other times the branches would just snap, and one of them would fall while the other laughed in amusement. They were both familiar with the sounds that breaking branches produce based on the branch thickness and location of the break. So, one day, they were playing down the road in the alders located off the pasture, about 400 feet down slope below the main house. My dad and uncle were both in the trees at the time, as they had been horsing around for a bit, riding the branches and breaking them, when they heard something big coming through the trees. My dad says branches and logs were popping, and you could tell that they were huge logs. He said it literally sounded like a bulldozer driving through the woods, or something plowing over big trees. My grandfather owned, operated, and logged his own land, and owned and operated many heavy machinery, so my dad wasn't just making a hollow statement. They jumped, climbed down from the trees. My dad remembers my uncle looking at him with a frightening look upon his face and saying, "What is that?" And even my dad didn't even know. They looked around and couldn't see anything. The crashing and cracking of logs came to a halt, roughly about 30 yards away from them. They still had no visual on who or what was rampaging through the forest towards them. It was silent and they were terrified. Then they heard a loudest, most ferocious roar that they had ever heard. It shook them. Literally, my dad says, like a really low, loud bass hitting your chest. They were both extremely scared and ran up to the house, not looking back behind them. They ran into the house, and my dad told his mother, but she did not believe him. They never went back down to play in that lower pasture area ever again. Though my dad would have to walk down near the area to feed the cattle before school in the early morning while it was still dark out. He was scared every time, especially after his second encounter. My dad's room was on the corner of his house, and he had a large bedroom window with no blinds. Squarely below the midpoint of the window was his bed. It's important to note that out of his window he had a clear horizontal field of view for about 20 to 25 feet from a distance of about 20 feet to where he saw the creature. At the right end of his field of view, looking out the window, there was a group of trees from which a dirt road led down slope to the barn and lower pastures, so he could clearly see unobstructed for 20 to 25 feet from the trees, and partially down the dirt road which led to the lower pasture, where years before him and his brother had heard that roar of snapping logs and trees. Anyway, my dad was asleep in his bed at this point. My dad fully awoke because he had to take a leak, and as he got up out of bed, he glanced out his window. It was a very bright full moon, like a harvest moon, so it was not hard for him to quickly discern what appeared to be a large figure walking with huge strides. My dad froze as his brain tried to comprehend what he was seeing. His brain was running at 1,000,000 miles per hour as he tried to rationalize what he was looking at. His first thought was that maybe it was just the neighbor's kid. But he quickly dismissed that and thought, as what would that kid be doing on their property at this time of night? The creature was also way too large to be the neighborhood kid, and the smoothness in which it walked was something my dad had never seen, and especially not being able to be achieved by someone in some cheap costume. It then dawned on him what he was looking at, and that was a Bigfoot. The thing was of gargantuan proportions, he told me, as my dad describes more clearly. He remembers the girth of the creature. He estimated 4 to 5 feet across in the shoulders, and his favorite description always seems to fall back to as wide as a sheet of plywood. He recalls that it was greater than 8 feet tall. He estimates even close to 10. Through the chest, he said it had to have been at least 3 feet thick. He also states that it crossed the standard width asphalt road in just 2 strides, and that as it moved, it looked like it was gliding because its gait was just so smooth and controlled. Sometimes he will demonstrate the movement and length of the strides of the creature that the creature took across the road. He takes the largest steps he can, and his arms swing are accentuated and drooped seemingly low, close to his knees. The height estimation he made was based on a roughly 5-foot fence that bordered the dirt road. The road led down to the lower pasture and feeding area / small barn for the cattle. He says the Bigfoot was at least a couple feet taller than the fence, as the fence's highest point came to roughly its mid-ribs, lower pec would be. I say highest point because remember, the road and the fence were sloping downhill. He saw this thing cross his whole field of view in roughly 5 to 10 seconds, taking roughly only 2 to 3 strides to traverse the unobstructed 20 to 25 feet that he could clearly see. I have asked him if he could make out any facial features, eye shine, muscle definition, etc. He says he could only really see the silhouette, as there were a near full moon out. He seems to recall it having a thick chest, big shoulders and arms, though I don't think he could necessarily see any definition. My dad says at the time it was about 1:45 in the morning, and as he had had one of those retro flip clocks with the flaps that lit up, he quickly flipped his alarm clock face down because it was giving off residual light, potentially lighting his room up and giving off his location to the Bigfoot he just saw across the road. He has said on multiple occasions, "I was so scared I lay down motionless in my bed. I was just so scared. I thought the thing could reach through my window and grab me. I didn't know what it might do." He said he laid there until the morning, which was excruciating because he really had to pee, but he was just too scared. He just laid there until the morning came. I checked with my grandparents and my siblings. His parents didn't believe him, but his sister and brother did. I verified that my dad told his sister, which is my aunt, and my uncle about the encounter, and she clearly remembers him being very scared. Whenever he tells the story, he still gets scared, and the emotion in his voice spikes a bit, like he's reliving a little bit each time he tells it. And he's not a small guy. I mean, this guy's 6'2", 240 pounds, all muscle, but he has no problem with it, and it's the most scared he's ever been in his life. I think my dad's stories share many characteristics with many classic characteristics and descriptions of Bigfoot encounters. Okay, here goes mine. This is a family story passed down through generations. They called it the Indian's Devil, and all I know is that my great-great-great-granddad was courting his wife and had to walk 12 miles up to the New Ireland Road. The story was that something jumped out of the trees at him. It had the hands and feet and face of a man, but the body of an ape. It followed him for miles, mocking him and then running away. The local Aboriginal people called it a devil and always told their children to stay close or it might snatch them. They know this thing, so I asked my grampy what happened, and he said that Grandpa was so upset that he took his bed for 4 days. He then got a bunch of men together and they tracked it down and shot it. I asked Gramps where they buried it, and he told me I'm not going to put it out on the internet. About 2 years ago, I checked the old property deeds, and the place where it was buried was in the existence at the time, so I'm going to guess the 1850s. Anyway, another friend was telling me that one of his relatives back in 1930s had a new car. The wheels were really small and not well designed for the snow. They got caught in the same region my grandfather was in a terrible snowstorm, and to prevent the car from going off the road, someone got out, though, that they would walk alongside the road and kind of guide the car. So he got out and something attacked him. It looked like an ape, but he could not see as well with the storm, so it was vicious. It slashed him across the face and left marks across his cheek. He fell back into the car and did not get out again. It was in the mid-'80s and my aunt lived in Colorado. My sister and I would visit her during the summer, and I think I was 10 and my sis was 9 at the time. We made friends with the local kids and did what kids do: run around and be stupid. Down the hill from where my aunt lived, there was this really swampy area next to a road. You couldn't walk on the ground due to the mud, and the trees were packed tight. I'm sure it was connected to a larger part of woods. All of us kids decided to go explore this area, and it was hard pushing through all the brush. Since we were kids, it was probably easier than an adult due to our size. We were pushing through for about 20 minutes, when all of a sudden there's this tremendous shaking of trees in front of us. I can't see what it is due to the thickness of the vegetation, but it's loud. It scares the crap out of all of us, and we start screaming and scrambling back to get out of the area. Even to this day, I get goosebumps thinking about it. It may have been a deer or elk, although I can't imagine any of those creatures being able to be in something that thick. All I know is the trees were shaking and it was scary. I don't remember any noises though, but I've heard that Bigfoot will shake trees as a warning.